Our negotiations are well known. Medinsky, aide to the president of the Russian Federation, talked about them. We achieved important negotiations, agreements on the largest over the 3 years exchange of POWs, 1,000 for 1,000, and written proposals for a future ceasefire. The prospect for Russian-Ukrainian summit was outlined. I won't repeat the commentary of the Russian representatives who in great detail talked about the outcomes of the meeting in Istanbul. I would like to underline one more time because we received a lot of questions. It was Russia's initiative put forward by the leaders of the Russian delegations about the exchange of POWs. No one should attempt to ascribe this to themselves. It's Russia's initiative. Yesterday, on May 19th, a long telephone call between President Putin and his American counterpart Donald Trump took place. Leaders of Russia and the US had an honest exchange of opinions about the current situation around Ukraine and ways to find a political solution to the conflict. Given the discussions in Istanbul, the Russian side yet again outlined the aspiration to achieve an ultimate just settlement of the crisis. Moscow will propose Kyiv to work out a memorandum about a future peace treaty. In the process, it should be understood that it is impossible to reach this aim without removing the root causes of the crisis. We are yet to agree on a lot of details and articulate principles of the settlement. To set the time frame, as we said many times, Russia never refused to hold negotiations. It is prepared to continue the contacts with the Ukrainian side on the above-mentioned issues. This approach was fully understood by President Trump. Now it's up to Kyiv. They are about to have an important moment to make a decision, given those historical and controversial steps that we saw in the recent days and in the time before that. And the statements of Zelensky about aspiration to peace should be translated into real actions and steps. We don't expect any common sense in the presidential office, but we can hope that the remains of the idea of the statehood will prevail and it will help them have a constructive stance. However, about after the negotiations, Zelensky and his European comrades supported strengthening Russian sanctions. We heard the same old story that Russia is not to be trusted, and they, as we were told, should be punished for not complying with an ultimatum about a 30-day ceasefire that Kyiv and its patrons wanted to present as a step to settlement. But they have to memorize or probably to put down this idea. Russia never agrees to ultimatums. We talked about it many times. I mean, the Russian leadership, first of all, and the Russian people said it too.
At the same time, what we're hearing from the West, this formula, this so-called formula, and it's yet another one. Of course, they're trying to come up with a formula like some alchemists on the conditions of war. It does not stand up to criticism. We've all been there before. And it is obvious that achieving peace through these Western European means by ultra-liberals is not their goal. They pursue a different goal to provide the Ukrainian armed forces with a respite at any cost in order to restore its military potential and continue the confrontation with Russia. And it's exactly what they're openly speaking about. And the crimes of the Kyiv regime continue. This is back to the issue of how during the war conditions it's impossible to hold negotiations. But who is exactly prolonging this war? Who is committing daily crimes against the civilians? They need to remember this in Paris, in Berlin, in London, in the collective Brussels. And I will help them keep that in their memories. On May 14, the Ukraine Nazis launched a drone strike on the administration of the town of Kamenka-Dnipropetrovsk in the Zaporozhye region, injuring 2 employees. On the 9th of May 15th, militants attacked the city of Melitopol 13 times with UAVs. All drones were shut down by air defense, but due to the detonation of one of them, a civilian was killed in a Kimovka settlement. On May 15th, 3 civilians were wounded as a result of an attack by enemy kamikaze drones on the village of Kamensky Hutor in the Bryansk region. On May 15th, the Ukraine Nazis launched targeted missile strikes on the Church of the Protection of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the hospital in the village of Totkina, Kursk region. As a result, the church was burned from the inside and the hospital building was destroyed. Since May 15th, dozens of daily attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces on populated areas and civilian vehicles in Belgorod region have killed 3 residents and wounded at least 14. In the DPR, during that time, at least 6 people fell victim to shelling and UAV raids during this period. 1 civilian was killed, 4 civilians were killed, and 4 were injured in settlements of Kherson region. Apartment buildings and other civilian objects were damaged. On the 9th of May 15th, as a result of an attack by enemy drones in the village of Shangar, a modern medical outpatient clinic serving 2,000 people, including 250 children, was completely burned down. So who is exactly continuing this fight? Perhaps there will be some common sense and clear minds in France and Western Europe who will finally put a name to those who are perpetrating these crimes. This is the fault of the crime who is sponsoring the Kyiv regime. It's their arms, it's their financing that is used against the civilians, civilian infrastructure. And these are targeted attacks. But for all that comes punishment. And it's not postponed, but it's happening based on the legal basis, on the work of law enforcement agencies right now. Russian courts continue to sentence Ukrainian neo-Nazis and mercenaries for their war and other crimes. Oksana Shevchenko, who was detained by Russian law enforcement in 2024, has been sentenced to 10 years in prison. On the assignment of the SBU, she participated in the preparation of an assassination attempt on the head of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, in 2023-2024 with the help of a radio-controlled explosive device. Mihail Dmitrashvili, Alexei Pichkalaury, and Torniki Gagaudze from Georgia, as well as Hector Joel Urbano Pedroma from Colombia, who fought in the Ukrainian armed forces, were sentenced to 14 years in absentia. And all these so-called legionnaires are on an international wanted list. Anton Frolkin and Andrei Shulgan, Ukrainian armed forces fighters detained earlier by Russian servicemen, were sentenced to 15 years in prison. Viktor Kirpichenko, Alexander Primachuk, Denis Pisachenko, Sergei Shapoval, Anton Borymsky, and Dmitry Yeremev, who blocked settlements in Kursk region and prevented the evacuation of civilians, were sentenced to 16 years in prison. It was established that Frolkin, Shulgan, Kirpichenko, Shapoval, Borymsky, and Yeremev repeatedly opened fire on civilians who tried to flee. They opened fire to eliminate them. The investigation into the mass murder of civilians by Ukrainian neo-bandits in the village of Ruske Porechny and Rusk region continues. At the moment, it has been established that 24 people were killed in this village. And some of them had been tortured before death. Now on the new or same old insinuations of the Kiev regime. The Kiev regime does not abandon its attempt to form a parallel reality in which the Russian Crimea is presented as occupied and in need of liberation. In his May 18th address on the occasion of the 81st anniversary of the deportation of Crimean Tatars from Crimea, Zelensky once again did not refrain from his usual line of rhetoric, drawing ridiculous parallels between the tragic events of 1944 and the Russian Spring in Crimea and Sevastopol in 2014. Zelensky's lamentations about the torture of Crimean Tatars look hypocritical, especially because this is how he's trying to present it. On the anniversary of the tragedy, Crimea was attacked by at least 4 Ukrainian aircraft-type UAVs. What is this exactly? Are those the representatives of the nation? And were those representatives of the nation absent there? On the one hand, Zelensky is crying about their hard fate in the historical context. On the other hand, right now, looking back on the past, he's putting forward criminal orders using UAVs against the civilians. And of course, among those civilians are representatives of the Crimean Tatars. Fortunately, those attacks did not harm civilians. They were shut down by Russian air defense assets. On the night of May 19th, 26 enemy drones were destroyed over Crimea. This is how the Kiev regime supposedly cares for the Crimeans that it intends to liberate. In fact, the Crimeans have long liberated themselves by openly expressing their support for joining Russia in the referendum of March 16, 2014. That was their true liberation from this horrible oppression, from this ideological slavery. I would like to recall that 96.77% of the participants in the nationwide expression of the will of the people, with a turnout of 81.36%, voted in favor of reunification with Russia. This was a real boon for all ethnic groups living in Crimea. The Russian presidential decree of April 21st, 2014 on measures to rehabilitate repressed peoples and state support for their development put an end to any speculation on the national subject in the Crimean context. Careful attitude to the national traditions, respect for cultural heritage of all peoples without exception is the basis for the development and prosperity of the peninsula. Would you like to see it for yourself? Please feel free to come to Crimea and see it for yourselves. This is how you should get your picture, not from Zelensky's nonsense. And Zelensky's regime fiercely fights against their own history. I've just drawn an example, and there's another one. They fight against historical memory, including that of their own heroes, of the glorious sons of the Ukrainian people in Kharkiv. A memorial plaque was dismantled in honor of Soviet military commander Pavel Simonovich Rybalko. Who was it? That's a native of the Kharkiv region who participated in the liberation of Ukraine from the Nazis. In every sense of the word, he's the heroic son of Ukraine. In Kiev, the Benderites demolished the head of the monument to Ivan Vladimirovich Michurin, famous Soviet biologist and breeder. In Odessa, they smashed the memorial plaque in honor of General Leonid Bocharov. Who is Leonid Bocharov? Do they know who that is? He participated in the defense of Odessa and Sevastopol. The criminals carried out their nefarious deed at night. Of course, because they wouldn't dare do it out in the open for everyone to see. In Akhtarka Sumy region, they destroyed a memorial inscription on a monument in honor of the heroes of the USSR who liberated Soviet Ukraine from Nazi invaders. The mass media reported that the authorities in Irpin, Kiev region, were preparing to destroy the mass grave of Soviet soldiers who fell for the liberation of the Ukrainian SSR from the Nazis. And now I'm referring to the mass media who are reporting that the Kiev regime is trying to approach the eternal flame as well. Well, they have long put out the flame of their conscience, so now they're daring to attack the flame, so there's no more reminders. The Ukrainastas repeatedly demonstrate what an infection it is, their true nature. However, it will be preserved, monuments and memorial sites will be restored, and the perpetrators of these crimes will receive the punishment they deserve. These facts once again confirm the urgency of the special military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, as well as eliminate the threats emanating from its territory. And as the Russian leadership has stated, all these goals will be achieved. We've received a lot of questions on the presidential elections that took place in Romania. And of course, we would like to just simply state that this is the matter of Romania. Of course, it's important that those anti-Russian forces do not appeal to the Russian side, but since they bothered us, then we will respond. On May 18th, 2025, of course, we would say that it was the elections, but it was a true theatrical piece of electing the president of Romania, because it started back in 2024. So these so-called elections, or these theatrical piece around holding the elections on the president of Romania, has taken a lot of time. It was full of scandals, and in the end demonstrated the catastrophic shoot of the trust of the population of this country toward their current authorities, towards the policy of strict following of the directives from the Brussels against national interests. The results of this course speak for themselves: deep interpolitical crisis and the polarization of the society. But once again, these theatrical pieces demonstrated another issue: crisis in Brussels itself. Even when children understood that something was wrong with the Romanian democracy, when they revoked the rounds of elections that had already taken place, when they tried to get rid of competitors, when against legally binding conscriptures, they introduced new novellas, the collective Brussels continued to put a farce that everything was okay. And even when the elder brother, in the face of Washington, delegated to the Munich conference on the matters of security, and said to the younger brother in Brussels, this was shameful, and the collective Brussels found nothing wrong with it, to once again admit the presence of severe problems on the territory of what they call the European Union. And of course they did all that in vain, because they've just made fun of themselves and shameful efforts of the Bucharest leaders to blame their own faults on Russia, firing off accusations against our country on interfering with the elections process. Not only are they baseless, they provoke nothing but laughter. We cannot fail to remember the results of the last year first round of elections under the made-up pretext. And we cannot forget the limitation on putting forward the candidature of the victor of the first round. So these are not our issues. And it's not our issue that the so-called pro-Russian candidate George Simeon, who is a nationalist, anti-Semitic actor who posed a threat to the well-being of the current ruling elite and the calm of the Brussels bureaucracy. This is not our issue. This is the indicator of the issue of the collective West within their propaganda campaign. They fully violated the basic norms of democracy. And first and foremost, they just simply crucify the freedom of speech. Against this backdrop, it's pointless to discuss on perspectives of finding a way out of the dead end of the Russian-Romanian relations that will fully depend on whether Bucharest is able to overcome Russophobic stereotypes and try to follow a more pragmatic foreign policy course that truly responds to the interests of the Romanian people. We've also received a lot of questions on the economic and social consequences for the European Union countries if they denounce the Russian energy sources. Practically every day, Brussels and other Western European states bring up this subject. Of course, we receive such questions regularly, so I would like to propose a complex response. As you know, on May 6th, the European Commission put forward some kind of roadmap on the EU's refusal to purchase Russian energy carriers by 2027. This is their plan. This is the continuation of their self-destructive line. And those are the Western European words that the European bureaucracy picked in 2022 within the plan Repower EU. And by 2027, they plan to fully stop purchasing Russian energy goods, oil, gas, or nuclear energy. And no matter how it sounds, over the decades, stable supplies of arguably cheap energy sources have provided the energy security of Europe, have supported its competency, its economical competency, and provided the growth and well-being of the population. And the European countries remain large purchasers of Russian gas. According to the data of the European Commission in 2024, they bought 52 billion cubic meters. On the information of the European Analytical Center Bruegel, the import of the LNG by the EU in January-February this year has amounted to 3.92 billion cubic meters, which is 5% higher than the similar period in 2024. And in February this year, they've hit a record on supplying through the Turkish stream around 1.5 billion cubic meters, which is 26% higher than yearly measures. Considering our traditional historical ties in the energy sphere, Europeans, against any common sense and economic profit, are following self-destructive line of policy. Once again, so that no one has any suspicion that these are nothing but statements that are not backed up by any data or figures. Allow me to pull up the statistics. Anti-Russian EU sanctions are striking the socio-economic well-being of the European states themselves. Due to renouncing the Russian energy sources, the European zone is seeing the economic stagnation. In 2024, the GDP growth has only been 0.9%. On the prognosis of the European Central Bank, the same figures will be present in 2025.
For the period from 2023-2024, the decrease was around 60%. The competitiveness and profits also decrease among the enterprises, and they also influence American companies across the Atlantics. It's because the European companies need to pay 2 times more for energy than the American companies. And no one can ask an obvious question in these countries. Why do those leaders, the regimes elected by people, maybe not through direct elections, but via some political constructions, they were elected in order to support and stimulate national interests, and mainly the peoples of their countries, primarily business interests, because these are market economy countries for whom it's of primary importance. Why have they done their best in order to literally destroy their own businesses in their own countries? by increasing energy prices, colossal economic losses. And I will reply that question. Why is it not asked? Because in a whole number of countries, we have just quoted an example of Romania, and in other European countries, the freedom of speech is just being destroyed. It's not allowed to make statements, and people are labeled, people who are trying to ask questions, and if that doesn't work, they just go to media outlets, they go to their homes and declare them illegal. That was the case with the media outlet correspondents who came to Russia, and with the question of Nord Stream supplies being renewed. And when they got an answer to their question that it's possible to do that in around 3 weeks, if there is an agreement and the necessary political will, they just came back with that response to the German audience. They published this response, and literally the next day they were declared illegal. They were prosecuted. The real hunt for them began. Real harassment. And Commissioner for the European Green Deal, Maroš Šefčovič, said that the energy crisis cost €1 trillion, astronomical sum for the European economy. Now these numbers are irrelevant. Now they quote different numbers. The losses are estimated to be €1.3 trillion. In the roadmap itself, the roadmap to quit Russian energy, those Russian energy supplies to the European Union, quitting them, it cost around €245 billion. It was not stimulating businesses and not even building their own alternative nuclear power plants, for example, or some other ways, development of some other ways to get energy for themselves, like hydro stations and something like that. No, €145 billion have been spent only in order in the future maybe to quit Russian energy. That's what is publicly announced in the European Union. The real harm made to Europe, and also indirect losses that they do not quote, do not make public, they are much higher. We understand that very well. Just to totally quit the remaining share of Russian energy supplies in European energy balance by market ways without additional interference, it's impossible. What's additional interference? What does it mean? It's just another sum of spending for the European Union, imposed by the European officials, ending gas contracts. And it will be even more expensive and suicidal measures. Growth in the shipment of LNG. It just kills everything. But they just continue. They just continue to bite the cactus. And the European officials, they have several times postponed making this roadmap public. There are reasonable opinions coming, for example, from Robert Fico, Slovakia Prime Minister, who classified as absolutely unfriendly with regard to Bratislava, this plan. He said that the EU will suffer more than Russia. That's observed by everyone on with the example of anti-Russian sanctions, further growth in gas prices. And that's the case, actually. It's not something invented. The prices in Western Europe grew by 6.7%. It's the data of the Westerners themselves. Russia has neutralized effectively many negative consequences, and the main direction of our supplies has been very quickly changed to new centers of international growth, including Asia. We transfer our payments into national currencies. Participation in foreign economic operation was about 83% for all kinds of goods. Now we look for some ways out of this situation and developing new areas of cooperation with OPEC+. Russia makes a significant input in a global and stability and security of oil markets. It's not about economy and energy. It's like a horrible illness that is spreading across Europe. For example, in Bulgaria, there has been unfriendly actions against Russian teachers and NGOs, Russian-friendly NGOs. The Russophobic deputies of the Bulgarian parliament made requests in order to find out the studies of Russian language and culture in schools and to prevent, quote, Russian propaganda, end of quote. It's just obviously the beginning. It will not be limited to that. If we mention some propaganda here, it's only anti-Russia propaganda. On BNT channel in Bulgaria, there was a whole number of coverage about children competitions with a Russian trace, so as they mentioned it. What is more important, obviously, it's about some it's about just gender-changing competitions, but maths, dance, chess, sports competitions. It's unhealthy, yes. Do I get it right? For official Sofia, it's just not decent to abandon common sense in that way because someone somewhere just demanded to provoke Russophobia. All that rubbish about Russian competitions with allegedly Russian trace is just broadcast throughout media outlets. It's just a classical witch hunt in the spirit of totalitarian practices of the 20th century. Those ages are long gone and conclusions have been made, but no. I think it's just it's not decent. It's unfair for the ancient history of the Bulgarian people. It's just primitive actions by official Sofia. Just dictation to eliminate just any sympathies of Bulgarian citizens towards Russia. But actually we have common history. We have spiritual and cultural kinship. Those clumsy actions cause indignation in Bulgarian society itself, especially in Bulgarian patriotic structures, who do not act in accordance with the interests of some other countries, but in the interests of their own people. Of course, we will continue to draw the attention of the international community to those flagrant violations by Bulgaria of the rights of their citizens in international norms in the sphere of international cooperation and humanitarian sphere. By the way, regarding the issue how it should be arranged, the Day of Slavonic Scripture and Culture is marked in Russia on the 24th of May. That's our relationship towards the culture of Slavonic people. It is dedicated to the great enlighteners Cyril and Methodius, who laid the foundation of the Slavonic script. We will not ignore the input of other countries to Slavonic script, to Slavonic culture. On this date, numerous events will be held in our country, the centerpiece of which will be an all-Russian festive concert with the participation of outstanding performance. His Holiness Patriarch Kirill will deliver a welcoming address. It will contribute to interstate and interfaith dialogue, foster respect. I address the officials in Sofia, strengthening fundamental moral values, respect for native languages and culture. This holiday is widely marked in our country and abroad. It reminds us of our common values, common roots of Slavonic languages. It marks the unity of Slavonic people. That's how our common past should be treated. The past that links us and still nurtures the culture of our countries, and not to destroy, not to disrupt the participation of children, as they say, in competitions with a Russian race. In St. Petersburg, on the 22nd and 23rd May, the 23rd International Likhachov Scientific Conference will be held. Those Likhachov readings were founded by the Russian Academy of Science, the Russian Academy of Education, supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. 1,500 major Russian and foreign scholars, politicians, public figures, church hierarchs, well-known figures, writers, journalists, and representatives from 57 countries. It's about the major trends in the development of human society, transformation of world order, and of course the world of education. Now it is about the transformation of the world order, problems and prospects. Within the framework of the Likhachov conference since 2008, there is a diplomatic program about the international dialogue of cultures attended by ambassadors from foreign states, and discussions about the issues, the relevant issues. Now the important anniversary regarding the relations of the Russian Federation and the Kingdom of Cambodia, the joint declaration on the principles of friendly relations. Our states have a broad, progressively developing political dialogue, trade and economic cooperation, growing humanitarian ties. Russia and Cambodia successfully cooperate on international and regional platforms. The rich experience accumulated during the last decades will further strengthen cooperation, mutual exchanges for the benefit of our countries, for stability and security in Asia-Pacific region and the world as a whole. One more important event, the EAU decision, the 24th of May, is marked as the EAU Day. It's based, this organization is based on respect for the interests of every participant. The countries participating in the EAU have reached a lot of results. like strengthening domestic markets, cooperation and transport, logistics, industry, agriculture, energy and food security. The EAU has become a major player internationally. It includes a network of international contacts, free trade agreements with Vietnam, Serbia, Iran, and a non-preferential agreement with China, and more than 80 memoranda of cooperation through the Union's supranational body, the Eurasian Economic Commission. Work on concluding trade agreements with Indonesia, the UAE, and Mongolia is at the final stage, and there is cooperation with Uzbekistan, Cuba, and Iran. And of course, we congratulate on the coming EAEU Day, and we thank colleagues from the Union countries and the Eurasian Economic Commission for fruitful cooperation, and we further aim at strengthening the integration economic potential for the benefit of the population and businesses of our countries. And now I am ready to answer your questions. Is международная жизнь with us? International life? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. If possible, could you speak up? Yes, I hear you well. We have mentioned elections in Romania, but I would like just to make one clarification. There is one detail here. How would you comment on the Telegram founder statement Pavel Durov regarding an attempt of French authorities to influence the outcome of the elections? Yes, we have seen those comments. Such attempts just to admit that or just to provide some counter-arguments regarding Nicolas Renner, intelligence chief from France addressing Pavel Durov. I think it's France that should make the appropriate clarifications with regard to that. It's not some leaks, it's not some anonymous sources, it's an open statement by a person who has created this internet platform for communication and who figured in measures against him by French prosecution authorities against this platform created by him. And clarifications, I think they should be provided by official Paris. But taking into account the events, I would like to remind that since the arrest of Pavel Durov in Paris in August 2024, we would note that, however, the French just mentioned this political context of this situation. It's just an obvious attempt to put pressure on an independent information resource. These platforms, they're just transborder platforms for communication, and every country should regulate activities on its own, in its own manner, but there are instruments for the resolution of those issues in a civilized manner, especially in the countries who say that no one has the right to somehow put pressure on business representatives, especially connected with the freedom of speech, with the distribution of information, and so on. So in this context, it will not be surprising to know that French intelligence officials, they have just made some attempts. It's not some fantasies. It's just a known fact now. I think that official Paris should provide explanations. It is obliged to do that. And neoliberal elites have interfered in domestic affairs of other states. It's not only about our country, we are the main target for them.
Almost every politician and party that is not in line with the general policy of the EU is subject to systematic persecution cancellation, as they say, and they made up pretenses. We shouldn't go far for examples. In Germany, for example, there were the outcomes of the elections in Romania were annulled, not like because they contradicted what Brussels wanted. Isn't the situation in Moldova the same? Politically motivated arrest of the head of Gagauzia, Yevgeny Agusul, continues this list. Let's remember the attempt to murder the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico. It was a result of the hostile atmosphere in Europe against those who is not in the ideological mainstream. And even those who would like to specify their position and ask a question. As to France itself, we have an impression that removing key political competitors through core decisions is getting a bad democratic tradition. Of course, I use the word democratic not literally here. There are situations that they can happen everywhere, but political competitors are removed in France in particular, and in this country those cases are rubber-stamped. We mean the current leadership and former political actors who occupied various posts. So the competitors couldn't claim anything in future. No, the case with Strauss-Kahn was a very vivid example. The examples of abusing of democratic norms by the French are published more and more often. You don't have to wait for decades to know this information. The international community has an opportunity to draw conclusions what the lessons of democracy by the French worth. The same applies to the statements from Paris against other countries. Let them answer to all the questions that were asked publicly. Oh, and I have one more question. You almost touched upon this topic about financing Ukraine at the expense of the European countries. How can you comment on the outcomes of the EU-Ukraine Defense Forum? It was the second one. You know that it's not a defense forum, but it's an aggressive get-together. And it's not the only one. It's one of a set of events. It is generated by the leadership of the EU to keep afloat the tools like the Kiev regime and to use it against Russia. It ended up with the statement about the integration of the Ukraine industry and defense base into the European defense base, in line with the ideas put into the so-called White Book on the European defense prepared in 2030. They use cheap defense capabilities, and the policy of the EU to force militarization of the EU to the detriment of the people of this association. It is obsession of the EU with destroying everything aimed at political and diplomatic settlement, not only around Ukraine. It's the situation in the center of Europe. It's an obsession with refusing finding ways out to settle the Ukrainian crisis. It's some kind of some huge wish to, despite everything, no matter the outcome, to move toward this destructive policy, to pursue this destructive policy. Thank you very much. Thanks to you. Is the TASS agency with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Well, with you, I would like to ask a question following the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul. What language did the delegation speak? I would like you to say the final word about it. What would you like to know? What language they used to negotiate? Yes, I want to know what language the delegations of Ukraine and Russia used during the negotiations in Istanbul. The Russian language. The Russian delegation spoke Russian. There was an interpretation in several languages into Ukrainian, English, and Turkish. I don't know who listened to the Ukrainian interpretation, because the Ukrainian delegation spoke Russian. It spoke the Russian language. Thank you very much. I can also say the following. The Ukrainian delegation read out some introductory word. They had a text, but not in Ukrainian. This introductory word was in English. Probably it was the interpretation from English into Ukrainian was for them, but the Ukrainian delegation did not speak Ukrainian during the negotiations. The Ukrainian delegation spoke Russian. You see? What language did you think they spoke? Ukrainian. It's a performance. All these declarations of the representatives of the presidential office that people should forget the Russian language, that everywhere Ukrainian should be used, and the persecution of Russian in schools, universities, and public spaces, the generation of the content on the internet and everywhere, those are only reasons to make fools of the people in Ukraine, like they did when they spoke how good it would be for them in the EU. They only wanted to refuse interaction with Russia. It's the same story. During public meetings there, they can speak that the leadership of Ukraine moves towards this, but they are moving towards the countries where they hit what they stole. They find people in Ukraine who speak Russian, and at the same time they shamelessly use the Russian language. It's one more manifestation of these terrible lies that the Ukrainian people are subject to by the Kiev regime. They don't like the history and the culture of Ukraine. That's why they try and destroy it. History and culture of Ukraine has ties with Russia. It doesn't mean it doesn't have its own identity. Of course it has. It has its own history and culture, but it has close ties with Russia, with the Russian language, with the Russian literature. As many representatives of the common country we lived in, they spoke two and even more languages. They were Ukrainian, but they associated themselves both with Russian people. No one divided themselves, but they only underlined their own richness, their special identity that they received from by the right of their birth. But people in Ukraine are robbed of even this. They are left without the Russian language, but even during the official negotiations they speak Russian. And there was an interpreter, but who he interpreted to is unclear, because the Ukrainian delegation spoke Russian. Thanks to you. Thank you. Is Vestia with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions for you. The first one is quite a big one. How does Russia see the preparedness of Ukraine for further dialogue? What are the key obstacles to the large-scale settlement? What conditions unify Russia and Ukraine, and what further steps are planned by the Foreign Ministry for negotiation process? I spoke about it in great detail today. Mr. Medinsky talked about it, and representatives of and our top officials commented on this, both in the administration of the president, and I think that those answers are excess. You heard them all. I'll tell you one more time. I talked about it, but I'll repeat myself. It is important to implement what we managed to agree on in Istanbul on May 16th about the biggest over the 3 years exchange of POWs, 1,000 for 1,000, and the written proposals for a possible future settlement process. Given this, we'll make further steps. Thank you. One more question. The Israeli army started a large-scale on-land operation in Gaza. How does Russian MFA evaluate these steps? Can this escalate the conflict? According to the information we have, Israel started more active actions in Gaza. We see more bombings that led to more victims among the civilians. Over the last 3 years, about 300 people were killed in the enclave. We are disappointed with the decision of the Israeli authorities. This will mean more people killed in. We state publicly many times that the settlement of the situation in Gaza is possible only through political and diplomatic means. For this, humanitarian aid in Gaza should be ensured. This will help settle the Israeli-Palestinian issue on within international law. we work on this bilaterally and in international organizations, first of all at the UN. Do you have any more questions? No. Then let's move on. Thank you. Is news.ru with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. News.ru. I'm Mikhail Rosen. We have 3 questions today. The upcoming week will be decisive for the future of Ukraine. That's what Ursula von der Leyen said during the negotiations with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. You rarely agree with the head of the European Commission, but probably you can agree on this with her. What factors, in your opinion, will define the fate of Ukraine? You know, I would like to just to say this. Am I right that Ursula von der Leyen said that that next week will be decisive for Ukraine? Is there any point to agree or disagree with this? We'll talk about it, but this phrase was critical 3 years ago. By the way, Ursula von der Leyen 3 years ago hold this very position. She worked in the European bureaucracy. Why? Back then, when the negotiations in the spring of 2022 started, she did not say that the upcoming week or days would be critical for Ukraine. But it was true back then, because first, they could encourage the negotiation process, but what did they do, including Ursula von der Leyen? They talked the Kiev regime out of it. They didn't talk about the negotiation table, about diplomacy. They talked only about the battlefield. And those who is stronger will be right. When Boris Johnson came to Kiev and made Zelensky to refuse the negotiations in the spring of 2022, where was Ursula von der Leyen? She could say that it was the European continent they talked about, and it was critical to continue the negotiation process. But she did not say that. But she's a fiery woman. She can respond to anything. She has an opinion on everything. But she did not say that because they hoped for another outcome. They wanted to inflict a strategic, as they make up, a strategic defeat on Russia. That's what they thought about. That is why this phrase that you want me to give my opinion on should be evaluated in terms of the situation that was 3 years ago. Back then, Ursula von der Leyen should have said everything she could so that the negotiations continued. And all this agreement that were almost worked out in Istanbul with the political will of our country would be implemented. But the plan was different. Now about today. The renewal of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine is an important outcome, but to give artificial time framework for this, to give ultimatums, to blackmail, to create hype around it is counterproductive.
So once again, I don't think it's necessary to agree with this wording for the exact same reason I've just mentioned. These words should have been said 3 years ago. And secondly, right now, we need to support the process itself and the implementation of what the sides are agreeing upon. Not back one side or bringing Zelensky over to one corner, whispering something to him between the tissues of paper and sugar as for the future of Ukraine. Unfortunately, the country has long lost the ability to make important, even necessary decisions, because now, for many years, not just years, for many decades, those decisions have been made for the Ukrainians, have been worked out even by those who are truly in charge of them, those who dictate to the Kiev regime how they should behave, who specifically dictate the course of Ukraine when it comes to internal and external policy. 3 years ago, Russia and Ukraine, after the negotiation process, have come close to reaching a peaceful settlement. But there is an important nuance here. Back then, the situation on the ground was different. And back then, Ukraine was capable of preventing their loss of territory because the negotiation process had been launched. But after the interference of the former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Kyiv refused to make any independent steps, has continued fighting, has renounced dialogue with Moscow, has continued fight until the last Ukrainian. And what has it resulted for the Kyiv regime? You can see how it turned out for Ukraine. Whether anyone has learned any lesson from it, it's hard to tell, but I believe we will see it in the near future. Thank you very much, Madam Zakharova. And if you will allow one more question. State Secretary of the U.S. Marco Rubio has warned that the Congress in the nearest time could exert further pressure on the anti-Russian sanctions if there is no progress on Ukraine. He also added that this initiative has significant support in both chambers of the American Parliament. Is the Russian MFA considering this statement as a threat? You see, we are taking note of all the statements coming from the high-ranking U.S. officials, and I believe that the current U.S. administration, there are clear minds in there, and they understand that pressure and blatant threats to Russia are counterproductive. They will bring no result. And history has proved it time and time again, even in the recent years. After the long pause, the Russian-U.S. contacts are restoring. Since Trump's inauguration, there have been 3 phone conversations of the leaders of our countries, which demonstrates mutual interest, even in the face of current disagreements, which is productive for interaction. And I would like to go back to your phrase. You've mentioned that Rubio warned on more severe sanctions if there is no progress on Ukraine. Is it possible for them to work out the same line of work when it comes to Boris Johnson? Because it has been proved, and it's now a well-known fact, that Boris Johnson undermined the progress on the Ukrainian resolution. Everyone knows it. So could they maybe work out a similar line of action against the person who truly undermined the negotiations on Ukraine? Who was behind Boris Johnson? Whose point of view he presented to the Kyiv regime? Those details could be worked out, but the fact that it was him and that the Kyiv regime has folded the negotiations at his order is as clear as the fact that under Biden's pressure, Zelensky has prohibited having negotiations with Russia, which fully undermined progress on Ukraine. So perhaps Congress could include them in the list of those against whom they could take subsequent measures. These are the people who truly undermined the peaceful resolution of the Ukrainian crisis. Russia in no way committed such acts. In 2022, we responded to the call on negotiations. Before that, 7 years, we've asked to implement the agreements, the Minsk agreements, and before 2014, we've talked how should the West continue to put forward their rhetoric on Ukraine, then Ukraine will be split in two. Every single time we mention what exactly needs to be done so that the situation does not aggravate. And then we continue to help people rectify their own mistakes. If you have no further questions, moving on. Madam Zakharova, I'm sorry, we have one more question, if you will allow. A few hours ago, we've received notice that for the visit of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lavrov and Yerevan, the activists have put forward a flag in the Kiev Reach insulting the President of the Russian Federation, and they've seen these flags in other spots as well. And some of the MPs of the Armenian parliament have supported it. Please, do you know how many people work in the American embassy in Yerevan? Do you know the exact figure? I don't know. Perhaps an estimate. You could guess. How many people are in an embassy? Several dozen. 2,000. So apparently some of them have still not realized that they need to stimulate the Russian-American relations instead of undermining Russian-Armenian. So apparently someone is residing in the US embassy following the old guidelines. Perhaps someone has still not run out of money allocated through US aid, which was exactly in charge of projects like these. So as fully as they've put up those flags, they can take them down. We have an extensive agenda with Armenia on all areas, not just for discussion, but for practical implementation, for practical work. The fact that a lot of those from the minorities do not like it, we are also aware of that. So we are devoted to our constructive agenda. And we perfectly understood this nature, that it was paid for, that it was perfected in many corners of the world, in many countries of the world. Perhaps they should try doing some good on the US aid allocated money to create something, to build something, to overcome a crisis. None of that, unfortunately. That's all they can do. And for that, you don't need a big brain. Thank you very much, Madam Zakharova. Thank you. Moving on. Media Works Hungary, are you with us today?
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you the possibility to being here. I have only one question: that does the direct communication between President Putin and President Trump have a direct impact?
Вы знаете, вы не могли бы уточнить?
Excuse me, could you please detail what exactly you're asking? Because you have a very wide phrasing and not clear phrasing. Could you specify specifically what you're trying to find out through your question? Direct communication between president and president. Does it have direct influence? What exactly?
Direct impact, that is it better for the peace talks, sort of peace negotiation? Are there any direct impact for this?
Мне сложно представить, я правда, честно говоря, не знаю.
I'm sorry, it's hard to imagine for me. Perhaps we've learned the hard lessons during the Biden administration, who had no direct influence on any processes in his own country. But I think that the current US president is more than actively analyzing and understanding the situation around Ukraine. It was part of his electoral campaign, the resolution of the situation in Ukraine, and this is part of his active international steps during the very first days following his inauguration. And as for the Russian president, both the situation around Ukraine and negotiations with his foreign colleagues are being conducted with clear outset of implementing the agreements that the sides have been discussing. So it's quite surprising that you pose such a question, but when it comes to the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and President of the US, Donald Trump, considering the fact that both presidents are truly, sincerely aware and they're continuously talking about the necessity of resolving the situation. So it's clear that there will be direct influence on this. They're making orders to their employees, to their administrations, to their diplomats. They're putting forward proposals. They're hearing out reports. So I don't think I can take on a competence to comment on that. But it's such an obvious fact. It's such a well-known truth for the Russian side that the only thing I can do to answer your question is, and I think that yet another proof of what you're asking about is that it's the US President Donald Trump who mentioned the necessity of eradicating the root causes of the crisis. Not just the surface vision of the situation, but truly going in deep, understanding the situation in depth. That's yet another proof that there is direct influence. I don't know, perhaps it's something getting lost in translation and you're trying to suggest something else, and then I can forward your request to the President administration. But I would like to recall, and I've already spoken about it, it's a well-known fact, but to support my response, that it was the initiative of the Russian president on holding direct talks with the Ukraine and sending by the Russian president of the Russian delegation to the talks that took place in Istanbul, and the daily commenting of the situation by the head of state clearly showcases that there is direct influence, is evident.
Спасибо вам. Приходите еще.
Thank you very much. Please come again. Is Almayadin with us today? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you. President Putin has invited heads and leaders of Arab states to meet on October 15th this year. What is your assessment of the Russian-Arab relations? Allow me to spin out the question that you've just asked and to mention that here we talk about the fact that in Baghdad on May 17th there was the meeting at the highest levels of the Arab League member states. There was an address of the President of Russia that was sent over, who invited them to the first Russian-Arab summit that is planned for October 15th of this year in Moscow. This is just to provide some background for your question. Russia and the Arab world is traditionally linked by the friendly relations. They have been strengthened over the last years. We see firm ties in cultural, humanitarian, and trade areas. At the basis of our interaction with the Middle East and the North Africa on the international stage is the closeness of our points of view and the necessity of finding a just world order based on true multipolarity, on the sovereign equality of states. Following the UN principles of international law, Russia consequently advocates for resolving any issues through diplomatic channels and contributing to finding peace in this region. We support our partners and we maintain close contacts with them. And we believe that the successful outcome of the first Russian-Arab summit in Moscow this year will add a positive impetus to the development of partnership and cooperation between our countries, between Russia and the Arab League states. Thank you. Thank you. Is the Moscow Post with us? Yes, we have only one question today. Estonia has tried to capture the ship that was heading for the Russian port, and the German MFA stated the necessity to strengthen the patrol in the Baltic Sea. What is planned through the MFA line in order to stop the provocations and provide the freedom of the ship transits in the Baltics? You see, we have repeatedly commented on the provocative statements of the NATO states and its member states who try to present the Baltic Sea as their own sea, try to redraw the order of shipping that is enshrined in the international law. And the allies on the Northern Atlantic Union try to impose their own rules that they believe will allow them to control any transportation that takes place through Baltics, especially those that they claim are conducted in the interest of Russia. For example, at the end of last year, NATO have fired off baseless claims and accusations against us on the disruption of underwater lines of energy and telecommunications. And in January of this year, they've launched the operation of Baltic Control to supposedly protect this submarine critical infrastructure. You see, they talk about some imaginary world. They talk about some explosion underwater. Because this was conducted against our joint civil infrastructure, against Nord Stream 1 and 2. This is what should be investigated. This is what should have been analyzed. But why, they say, when they should instead come up with nonsense, appoint a watchguard, and now they resort to active steps against the freedom of world shipment. That's exactly how you should interpret it, against the freedom of international shipment. Last week, they've tried to push out into Estonian territorial waters the ship of the Gabon flag, which was trying to reach the Russian ports. They didn't achieve any results. And due to the actions of the ship crew, they failed. So what's next? Will they pursue a line of active piracy? Will they try to sink ships? Will they try to spoil it somewhere else?
Let's look at the situation from the legal point of view, from the point of view of international law. In the Baltics, outside the territorial waters of state, there is the freedom of navigation underway, which allows the presence of ships and vessels flying any flag. Any measures to interfere in these waters are possible only based on a specific list of reasons. Some protection, as they put it, of underwater infrastructure, checking ship documents is not included into this list, the list of reasons. According to the convention, UN Convention on the Law of the Sea of 1982, coercive measures against a foreign vessel, it is necessary for the state whose flag the vessel is flying. The state must agree. The agreement is necessary. And interference in the movement of vessels is based exclusively on unilateral restrictive measures, some suspicions not based on anything, and some attempts to uncover allegedly shadow fleet. And provocative actions by NATO in the Baltics were not accepted by international community and negatively assessed. Our reaction will continue. Reaction against the abuse, violation of rights in sea waters, especially if these actions create risks for the security of navigation. Thank you. Thank you. Is Reuters with us? Madam Zakharova, hello. We're here. We have the logical question, a question asked by our colleague from the Moscow Post, and you have just answered that. Yes, thank you. You also have sometimes good mood. Thank you. Is Bolt News with us? Yes, my question was also the same as by the colleagues from Reuters. It has already been answered in detail. It's really a holiday for me. Thank you very much. Is Author I with us? Yes, Author I is here. I have just one question. It's on a different topic. On the 17th of May, the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, amended Decree number 1478 on the coordination role by Foreign Ministry of Russia in the unified foreign policy line of the Russian Federation on new scope for the Foreign Ministry to report to the President on violations by officials and government employees in the implementation of foreign policy. If that can be made public, what was the reason of these amendments, and does it mean that officials should now agree on the stance with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia? It would be more correct. The new order will allow to improve coordination of domestic public bodies in our country. This decree has existed, presidential decree has existed for many years on the coordination role of Russian Foreign Ministry in foreign policy of the Russian Federation. Is the major normative act regulating the activities of official bodies and territorial entities, and official bodies should agree upon the actions with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the actions regarding international partners, and this order is in place for, as you see, 14 years, yes, and since the 17th of May this year, some amendments have been made. Something new within the scope of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, reporting on violations of the requirements by this decree, and there are proposals in that regard. Thank you very much. Thank you. If you have no more questions, then goodbye to you. All the best to you. Prosperity to you.